Okay. Good morning and welcome to today's program. I'm Sharon Suber, the president of the American Association of University Women of New Jersey. As many of you know, our mission is to advance gender equity for women and girls, and we are the nation's leading organization for equity in higher education and women's economic empowerment. We advocate for federal, state, and local laws and policies to ensure equity and to end gender discrimination. Nationally, the American Association of University Women has over 100,000 members. AAUW, the American Association of University Women of New Jersey, is a state affiliate representing over 1,000 members in 17 branches and 9 colleges throughout the state. Each year, the state recognizes women that we feel represent our core values. Women as Agents of Change is our award granted annually to women who have worked to assist women in their endeavors to reach their true potential, demonstrated leadership in supporting the empowerment of women, and continue to strive to reform political, economic, or social areas in support of women. At this time, I would like to introduce Anjali Mehrotra, and she is our State Community Communications Vice President, the Public Policy Director, and the Awards Committee Chair. Anjali.
Thank you, Sharon. As Sharon mentioned, we are going to start with our honorees today. Our first honoree for our Agent of Women as Agent of Change Award for 2025 is Lieutenant Governor Tahesha Wei. I've had the pleasure of working with the Lieutenant Governor and actually accompanying her on a Trade Commission trip to India this past November and December. And it is my honor to present this award to her today. Tahesha L. Wei serves as New Jersey's third Lieutenant Governor. She was appointed to the position by Governor Phil Murphy on September 8th, 2023. A lifelong public servant, Lieutenant Governor Wei has devoted her entire career to improving the lives of her fellow New Jerseyans. Over the past 2 decades, she has served at numerous levels of local and state government. As Lieutenant Governor, Ms. Wei brings her extensive experience to bear on addressing the greatest challenges facing New Jerseyans, from making life more affordable to protecting fundamental freedoms like access to reproductive health care and equality under the law, to maintaining New Jersey's reputation as the best and safest state to raise a family. In addition to her role as Lieutenant Governor, Ms. Wei also serves as New Jersey's 34th Secretary of State, a position she has held since the beginning of the Murphy administration. As Secretary of State, Ms. Wei leads one of the nation's oldest constitutional offices and directs a department with a diverse portfolio. In her capacity as New Jersey's top election official, she has overseen the State Division of Elections and its work in securing our democracy and ensuring broad, fair access to the right to vote. Prior to joining the Murphy administration, Lieutenant Governor Wei was an administrative law judge for the state of New Jersey. In 2006, Lieutenant Governor Wei was elected to the Passaic County Board of Chosen Freeholders and served as the freeholder director in 2009. Lieutenant Governor Wei is a graduate of Brown University and holds a JD from the University of Virginia School of Law. Thank you again, once again, to Lieutenant Governor. We are so honored that you joined us today, and we're looking forward to hearing from you now.
Good morning, and thank you, Anjali, for that kind introduction, my dear friend. But you forgot to tell everybody I did all of that by the age of 19. I'm female empowered here, but I am so humbled truly to be recognized by the American Association of University Women, and so grateful for your more than 140 years of advocacy. And It was also a pleasure to be visited by you, Anjali, and Sharon, Madam President of this chapter this week, and to learn more about the incredible work being done by AAUW. There is no question that you have opened doors and expanded opportunities in countless ways, not only through educational programs and scholarships, but also through advocacy and community engagement. So, can we show AAUW some love? Now, it's always an honor to be surrounded by strong, dedicated, inspiring women, an experience that I am thankful for since birth due to my wonderful mom. She did an incredible job of leading by example and taught me to show up and do good for my community. Values that I know are shared by every member of AAUW. And as a mom of four daughters who think I only graduated from kindergarten, nonetheless, I have done my best to empower all of my daughters to take up space and let their voices be heard. Now, speaking of letting your voices be heard, in my role as Secretary of State, I can't miss an opportunity to encourage all of you to be engaged in our democracy. Strengthening it through ensuring access and expanding ways to vote has been some of the most meaningful work of my career. And I fully believe that our democracy is strongest when more people participate. And I am incredibly proud that even beyond this work, I have remained committed to ensuring that women's voices are heard, their talents are recognized, and their opportunities are expanded. But we know that women still face obstacles that limit our potential. That is why I know I have dedicated myself to creating pathways for future generations, advocating for policies that support equal access to education, career advancement, and leadership opportunities. So, this recognition is not just an acknowledgement of my work, it is truly, and I feel blessed that it is indeed a celebration of the collective efforts of educators, mentors, policymakers, and organizations like AAUW who refuse to accept the status quo and instead push for progress so our communities, people, economies can thrive. To every young woman pursuing her dream, and to every individual lifting others up, being that change agent we so need in these times, keep striving and know that your impact matters. Thank you once more for this incredible honor. Congrats to my fellow distinguished honoree, Dr. Keenan. Enjoy today's webinar and let's continue the work of shaping a more equitable world. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Our next honoree, Dr. Claudine Keenan. I met her when I first came into AAUW several years ago. I am impressed and amazed that she took on a program, which is our state STEMs, forwarding girls in this state program. So this is our next honoree. She has been an academic advisor team. She's been on the academic advisor team at Stockton University since 2006 and is currently transitioning to a faculty role. Claudine began her career as a New York public high school English teacher, and then served as a faculty member in writing at Penn State University. She served as director of graduate programs at Marlborough College in Vermont before coming to Stockton University. At Stockton, she serves as executive assistant to the provost, as chief planning officer, and as dean of education, and lastly, as the interim vice provost. Starting in January of 2026, she will serve as professor of instructional technology. She earned her doctorate in higher education leadership from the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, my alma mater. Her master's in rhetoric and composition from California State University in Northridge, and her BA in English and Education from Adelphia University in New York. Outside of this work, Claudine has served on the New Jersey State Board of Education and served on many local school boards of education. She is the lead on the New Jersey STEMS team for the American Association of University Women, volunteering to organize the youth STEMS program every single year. I am honored to give this award to you. Thank you. Claudine. Okay.
Thank you so much, Sharon and Anjali and Lieutenant Governor. I am absolutely honored to be here today. The only designation more humbling than receiving this award is receiving it on the same platform with you, Lieutenant Governor. And thank you for your words of inspiration. They are definitely right in line with what we've been doing with the American Association of University Women in lifting and empowering women's voices to be in all the places where we should be. And you're an excellent role model for all of us about being in the policy space. Similarly, the American Association of University Women has found over the years that it's not enough to just bring women into universities on an equal playing field and to make sure that we are 50% or lately more of the college attendees and graduates in the United States. But in addition, to look very closely at what are the majors and the fields wherein women are succeeding and raising voices, elevating and empowering our sphere of influence. Over the years, AAUW's research has found that there have been persistent gaps in gender equity in majors like chemistry, physics, engineering, mathematics. It's not a coincidence that these majors are often those that lead to some of the more important technological careers for innovation and leadership for the future that we will lead. And it is always a better world, a better future for all of us when more of us are represented at the table in the decision making and in the innovations. So through the work that was brought to my attention through the American Association of University Women here in the New Jersey state chapter, I became involved in hosting a national model for a camp called Tech Trek. Tech Trek is a residential hands-on camp that engages girls in STEM at precisely the point in their development, socio-developmentally, where they either turn away from science, technology, engineering, and math, or they embrace it wholeheartedly. And that's the summer between 7th and 8th grade. For all of us who remember that time or who are close to people in our lives who are in that time, it's the very time when young people don't want to be different than everybody else. They don't want anybody to look at them for any reason whatsoever. They just want to sort of fade into the background and just go about their struggles and their socio-developmental lives without any interruption. So it's that model of the camp, of a single gender camp, that brings these young women together to normalize the innovation, the resilience, the determination that it takes to succeed in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. All the research continues to point to that. And in my career, as you've heard, I've been engaged in higher education and in secondary education in many different states, in many different forums, and I have found that there are times when being surrounded by a group of like-minded people who are doing what you're doing, who are experiencing the same challenges, the same setbacks, and then the same triumphs, is often a way to create a lifelong network of empowering friends, colleagues, supporters, the people who are going to be your mentors and sustain you throughout the empowering career that you're going to have well into the future. As we reach our decade anniversary, our 10th anniversary of hosting the camp here in New Jersey this very year, I am so proud to say that 6 of our alumna who are from earlier years of the camp are returning as volunteers. They will be the counselors and, as we affectionately call them, dorm moms, the women who stay in the dormitories overnight with the 7th grade girls, many of whom have been away from their homes for less than 1 or 2 nights in their whole lives to this point. So it's a big challenge for them to stay at a university campus, to be engaged all week long in science, engineering, technology, and mathematics in laboratories, in our living laboratory of 2,000 pristine acres of Pinelands Preserve, out in the Atlantic Ocean, dragging seine nets and looking at the catches under a microscope. All experiences are going to be brand new to these 13-year-old girls who are going to be inspired by their near peers, we call them, their predecessors in the camp, alumni who have graduated from the camp from 2015 all the way up through 2024. Our last year's campers will be coming back for a one-day reunion. We can't mount this camp all year long without a tremendous effort from all the women of the American Association of University Women. Everybody in the state of New Jersey who supports this program in any way, whether it's just your goodwill and great thoughts, your contributions, your volunteerism, your appearance as inspirational mentors at our Professional Women's Night during camp, whatever your efforts to support this camp, you make it possible, and we are grateful. A team of women is generally the best way to get any major project with many, many complex components to it underway. And it's also the best way that I've come to know over this past decade of sustaining the success of that model and this camp for this many years. I look forward in the next 10 years ahead to the camp being equally successful and to building more and more structures and support activities and events for our alumni to participate in with all of your support, and again, with my profound thanks. Thank you again to the committee, to the American Association of University Women, to all of the volunteers who are helping us all the time. And in the future, if this is the first time you're hearing about it, please come Google Tech Trek New Jersey to learn a little bit more about who we are, what we do, and how you too can get involved. Thank you. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Anjali.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claudine, for your words. And again, I do want to reiterate that we are so honored to both present this award to the Lieutenant Governor and to you as well. We're now going to start the second portion of our program today. And I want to say that we are so glad to have you here for what I think is going to be a inspiring and empowering conversation. Today's panel features 4 incredible leaders who are making real change in their communities through advocacy, organizing, and leadership. And in this moment that we are experiencing in our country, I think their leadership really stands out. And that's why we decided to have a panel to talk about, what we as individuals can do, because I'm sure a lot of us feel overwhelmed. So please join me in welcoming our panelists. Our first panelist is Lauren Albrecht. Since 2019, Lauren Albrecht has served as the Garden State Equalities Policy Consultant before transitioning to the role of Director of Advocacy and Organizing in 2023. Lauren attended Rutgers and Thomas Edison State University and holds a BA in English and Art History. Lauren is a small business owner and serves in a leadership capacity for several local and statewide political organizations for the past decade. Lauren has been the recipient of several prestigious awards in the LGBTQ advocacy space and her commitment to securing rights and representation for New Jersey's LGBTQ community has led to notable budgetary and legislative victories, as well as exponential increases in representation. A lifelong resident of New Jersey, Lauren resides in Wall Township with her family, and in her free time, she enjoys reading, going to the beach, hiking, running, and travel. Our next panelist is Leslie Bockol. Leslie is an organizer, writer, and communication specialist whose political journey began in the wake of the 2016 presidential election. Motivated to take action, she joined the Montclair-based grassroots group NJ IIth for Change, where she steadily rose through the ladder of volunteerism, from online chat participant to Facebook moderator, newsletter writer, novice organizer, communications director, and ultimately co-executive director and board member. Building on the skills and experience she developed in the grassroots space, Leslie went on to become a professional organizer with New Jersey Working Families. There, she expanded her reach across additional congressional districts and geographic areas, engaging more diverse communities of voters and advocating for a wider range of legislative priorities. Her work continues to center on empowering people through civic engagement and strategic communication. Next, please join me in welcoming Parul Khemka. Parul Khemka is a disability rights advocate, public educational leader, and a dedicated parent of 3 children, including a 16-year-old daughter with autism and global developmental delay. She is an elected member of the Livingston Board of Education and brings both her lived experience and policy expertise to her work on behalf of students and families. A graduate of the Partners in Policy Making program through the Boggs Center at Rutgers, Parul has been trained in effective advocacy and systems change for people with disabilities. She is a COPA certified SEAT SEAT 2.0 special education advocate, a SPAN parent resource specialist, and a SEVA trained volunteer advocate. She serves on the legislative team of the New Jersey chapter of the National Council on Severe Autism, where she channels her passion to advocate for policies that ensure adults with disabilities can lead meaningful, independent lives. Parul holds a master's in biostatistics from Brown and a bachelor's in statistics from Delhi University. Last but certainly not least is Amy Torres. As the executive director of the New Jersey Alliance for Immigrant Justice, Amy leads the charge for immigrant rights in the state. Since 2021, Amy has deepened NJIJ's policy advocacy and grown its movement building programming. NJIJ is now the largest immigrant coalition in the state. Notable achievements including winning the East Coast's first statewide ban on immigration detention, New Jersey's inaugural language access law, and NJIJ's Advocacy Academy, a first of its kind training program that leverages case studies from successful New Jersey racial justice campaigns to empower the next generation of emerging organizers and activists. Firmly rooted in Amy's identity is her experience as a second-generation Filipina American and the core belief that human rights and liberties should not be subject to change because of something as arbitrary as birthplace, border, or paperwork. As you can see, each of these women brings deep experience and a fierce commitment to justice, and we're honored to hear from them today. So before I get started, I just want to say that we will be taking audience questions towards the end. And if I could please ask anybody who wants to ask a question to either put it in the Q&A or the chat because we will be monitoring those. Just checking. Did we lose Lauren?
I just saw her on, but I'm not sure what happened.
Hopefully she can join soon again. Let's get started. I do want to say that this has been a big week for trans rights. As many of you may know, the Scaretti decision from the Supreme Court this week was very troubling, where they basically ruled that Tennessee's ban on gender affirming care for minors does not violate the Equal Protection Clause, of the Constitution. And I know that today, Garden State Equality is actually holding a rally in Asbury Park, and I think Lauren is trying to juggle a lot of things. So we're going to give her some room to do that, and we hope that she can join us again. So my first question is for all of you, and I guess we'll start with Amy. And this is, as I've also experienced, and I'm sure you have, advocacy work can be deeply personal and often begins with a defining moment. And some of your bios actually hinted on this, but I'd like you to share a moment in your journey that really inspired you to step into this work, or a turning point that affirmed your path as an advocate. Amy?
Yeah, thank you, Anjali, and thank you so much to everyone from AAUW for having us. I think for me, and this is a conversation that we've had on our team a lot, I think it's a universal experience that a lot of us who have immigrant heritage share, is that for many of us, we've been advocating since we were kids. Children of immigrants are sometimes the primary translator in their household, or the cultural broker, or the first to do X or Y or Z. So we've sort of been primed to be advocates our whole lives. So this feels a continuation of that experience. And I also, really believe that when I look back on, the history of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, there's such a legacy of movement building and social justice work that I'm really proud to be a continuing part of.
Thanks, Amy. Leslie?
Hi, Anjali. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with people today. I'd say that my origin story as an activist and eventually an organizer and advocate is really, really trite. I was one of the many regular people, a working parent, a soccer mom who was galvanized by the 2016 election. With Trump elected, what was about to happen to us seemed really plain as day. Slow motion train wreck. And it was impossible not to pivot from what I'd been doing for 25 years into something that was very new and very different, out of my comfort zone. For me, like I think a lot of people, that was the moment. I'll admit, like changing my life path was scary, but Trump being elected was already scary, and pivoting meant that I could do my own small part, whatever that was going to be, to fight it. So for me, that was the start.
Parul?
Thank you, everybody, for having me. Thank you, Anjali, for giving me this opportunity. This is amazing in the company of many, many wonderful, accomplished women. So my journey is definitely inspired by my own personal fight. I moved to the country as an adult, as an immigrant. I went to school here. Everything was hunky-dory. I was doing exactly what an immigrant is anticipated to do: go to a good school, get a good job. And then I had a child with disabilities. And when that happened, my life turned around. I became a stay-at-home mom, to go through all of the services and learning how to navigate special education in this space. I was in Massachusetts, and then I moved to New Jersey. And just coming to, my New Jersey, actually, I wasn't in a big immigrant population where I was in Massachusetts. And when I moved to New Jersey, we are very diverse here. And I realized how much immigrants trust the system to do right by their kids. And I realized how much their language barrier gets in the way to be able to access what their kids need. Um, I was fortunate. I had no problems with getting my child what I needed, but that kind of sparked like almost this urge in me to make sure that those around me who don't have the same either resources or access to the knowledge do not suffer. So my interest is actually got heightened with between amongst to look at marginalized populations and their disability experience. And as life went on, I saw how basic human rights are actually denied to people with disabilities. So, that's where I have been. And I hope to be able to make a little dent with some of the things that have been happening, group home abuse and neglect, and everything that's changing with Medicaid and education. So hopefully we can educate our parent group, and even those that don't have English as the first language.
Thank you so much, all of you. And I have to tell you that, I mean, I think each one of your stories really resonates with me as well. I worked with Amy on the Immigrant Justice Coalition because, of course, I too am an immigrant, an AAPI, fellow AAPI actually. And Leslie also knows that. I mean, I think Leslie's story is something that a lot of people, not just New Jersey, I think across the country, a lot of women really identified with, sort of this wake up moment after the 2016 election that galvanized them to action. And for Parul, I have to say, one of probably the best pieces of advice that I ever got from somebody was that when my kids were little and they were just starting kindergarten, somebody told me, get involved in the school system, get involved in the PTA. And it really served, I think, myself and my kids well because I was able to be a voice for not only my children, but also, other children that needed it. So I applaud all of you for what you're doing. But let's talk about this a little bit more in detail. Each one of you works at the intersection of identity, justice, and leadership. Let's talk about the power and the challenges because we know that there are challenges of that intersection. So, how does your personal identify influence how you show up in your work? And how do you then build coalitions across communities? We'll start with Leslie.
Thanks. So I found this a really interesting and thought-provoking question. I started my political work in the 11th Congressional District in communities that are predominantly very white, very suburban, educated, middle class, upper middle class. I'm white, I'm suburban and educated and middle class, so that was a really comfortable zone for me to be working in. I spoke that language, and making connections with constituents and potential volunteers was relatively easy because of all of that. And, I had a decent sense of what makes people tick and what motivates people in that kind of community. In 2023, I joined New Jersey Working Families, which has a very different constituency. The mission of Working Families is building governing power for the multiracial working class. And that's so that was a new territory for me. Building alliances in communities of color, in immigrant communities, working class communities was a different kind of challenge. So there were a lot of learning curves going on all at once and a lot of introspection and sorting through my own unconscious biases. And as an organizer out in the field, I did a lot of work both on myself and my preconceived notions, but also on trying to build trust that I was still in the process of earning with communities that I was sort of a new face with. And I tried to earn it by entering dialogues with like a willingness to listen and learn, with a lot of curiosity and respect, and mostly like acceptance that I'm not the expert in what every community needs. The members of that community are the experts, and have established leadership and structures, and to learning that to build a productive relationship with people who that I don't share a background with. To be productive, I have to prove myself by doing the work and earning it by really listening to people with openness and respect, and an understanding that like building that trust, it isn't going to happen on my timetable. That it's an ongoing process that takes patience and sort of a shared accountability.
Thank you, Leslie, and that is absolutely true. It's really important. So yes, we do have to, always center the communities, and again, as you said, earning trust is really important. Amy?
Yeah, when I was reading over this question, it reminded me a lot of the language access and data disaggregation campaign, Anjali, that we had the great opportunity to work on together. Because I think there's so many ways in which our identities and our heritage are so different, but because the existing systems of power are the same, right? Like white, male, dominant spaces, the experience of immigrant communities can sometimes feel similar, even across different languages, across different identities. When we were fighting for the language access campaign, it was just so one, it was frustrating, but it was beautiful to hear how many people had the same story of being turned away from something because of not getting it in their own language, or someone being frustrated with their level of English, or even experiencing things like accent stigma, and seeing so many people come together from totally different walks of lives, different tenures in the United States, some people who've been experiencing this over decades, some people who are relatively new arrivals, but having the same experience. It was just really wonderful to watch people fight for this together. And in tandem to win the data disaggregation or the data equity law, which would provide needed visibility for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders and Middle East and North African communities in New Jersey, who previously had just been lumped other one category Asian or white, so two racial categories for 90 plus different places of origin. So it was just a really wonderful moment to feel literally seen and heard at the state level. And I think it was a really empowering moment too, to demonstrate that, look, immigration isn't just a Latino issue, or it isn't just a southern border issue. It's something that happens everywhere and to all of us. And I think that was a really fulfilling moment for me.
Thank you, Amy. Yes, that was definitely a very interesting campaign, and I mean, it really came down to the wire. It's definitely an experience that I will never forget. Parul, same question.
So, I obviously moved here as an immigrant, but I will tell you, special education law is complicated for anybody, but let alone a person who does not have an aunt who's working in the schools or has been a supervisor. And that is most of our immigrant population, whether it's South Asians, whether it's Latino, whether it's, or if you don't have access to money, due process is not a trivial thing to happen at all. So I think like at first I was showing up for children with disabilities, and then I was seeing that, oh my goodness, in affluent neighborhoods, they all have access to due process. But then what happens to the marginalized groups where they're not able to access public school, where they're not able to access these supports and services? And I met somebody from East Orange who came up and told me, they're like, my daughter is in 6th grade and she cannot read. And I'm like, so has she been evaluated? And they're like, what does that mean? I just keep begging her to actually read. And I'm like, I have been in this like space where I have forgotten about like all of these other spaces that are hurting right now, and these children who are falling through the cracks. I mean, we see it in the data. I know New Jersey was ranked #1, but when you look at the NAEP scores, it's actually the children with disabilities that are not making progress. Children with low socioeconomic status have actually declined in their scores. So when you actually break the data down, it's very telling where the groups that we are failing in. And I think those realizations, those campaigns, those groups, like I'm a Jersey Can fellow, and I'm working alongside somebody who's in Camden County, and really putting that together, like I figuring out how to help those children who are not coming to school because of the fear of deportation, but also getting those disabled kids services, children who cannot read. It has been a tremendous learning, and my heart and soul now is invested in making sure that these culturally different groups who don't question authority, who don't question, who don't want to ruffle feathers, are actually seen and heard. So that's where my heart is, and that's where I just have learned that listening is key, just like Leslie said.
Thank you, Parul. I think you make such a great point because, we often talk about how great our education system is in New Jersey, but we also need to recognize that there are a lot of cracks, there's a lot of disparities. And, the goal for all of us should be to make sure that every child, no matter where they are, who they are, is able to really take full advantage of all opportunities, and, live to their potential. So thank you, Parul, for that. I'm going to ask a little bit more specific questions now. So we're going to start with Leslie. Your organizing work has focused on holding elected officials accountable. I think we always hear the stories of how you started with Rodney, and you've seen tremendous success in doing so with NJ IIth for Change. So what would be your advice, and what strategies do you think have been most effective for building that grassroots power to get results? And how can we use them really in the current moment to hold the current federal administration accountable?
Thanks, Anjali. So New Jersey 11th for Change as a grassroots organization was really fortunate to have started building a relationship with our current rep, who's Mikey Sherrill, from really day one of her political career, really from before day one. So we've always had kind of a unique access to share our perspectives and our concerns with her. And I know that in many other districts, that's not the case. But given this foundation that we were fortunate to start with, of the core leadership's sort of early relationship with our rep, the key thing was expanding our influence by building our numbers. I mean, that's really at the basic first step. So to do that, we cultivated a network of volunteers really in all corners of the district. We had over 50 towns we were working with, and we created town teams with their own leaders. And collectively, like by decentralizing the power that way, it helped us tap into local expertise. It helped us share the workload, crucial, empower a lot of new leaders and grow our volunteer base, not to mention get our tentacles out in all the corners to voters that are all over the district, not just in the couple towns where the group started. And then, what did we do with our network? Group leadership very consciously created outreach materials. We did informational newsletters, we did election programming, things that could be shared not just with members, but with our members out, other communities. And sharing information about governance and political issues, electoral processes, basic civics, all of us learning together, because so many of us, like me, we're new to this endeavor. So that we gradually built this well-informed, somewhat unified base of constituent volunteers that we could mobilize to take action. Things like, help register voters at our table at Montclair Pride, or, come canvass on Saturday, we're bringing donuts, or call Mikey today about whatever issue. And we told people, when you call your rep, tell them that you're calling from NJ IIth for change. And that way the representatives know you're not just, a voice in the wilderness, that you actually have the weight of an organization behind you, that if you're calling, there are more people who probably feel the same way. And that can help build impact and influence. It means that your call is more impactful, but it also helps build up the organization's heft and reputation going forwards. So, do we always get what we want when we encourage volunteers to raise their voices? No, of course not. But by developing this network, we built a group of people who know how to keep hammering, either in ways we're encouraging them or in things that they personally are motivated to do. And as for holding the current federal administration accountable, it's hard to know what's going to scale up of those techniques, of those tactics. But I think the same principles really have to apply. It's bringing people together, it's empowering them, informing them, teaching them how to take action, and then deploying them to press their representatives. And we're seeing that happening in lots of different ways. It's not just making calls, writing letters, writing emails. It's showing up in person and putting your physical presence, adding to that adding to those crowds, and creating louder voices, and sharing what we know, what our members know, with their friends and neighbors to build the movement. Anjali, does that address sort of what you're?
It does. I do want to make a couple of points though, which I don't think you give your group and yourself enough credit, because I think what you guys were able to accomplish was truly, I don't want to say unique, but it was remarkable. And it was remarkable because there are tons of organizations that would like to create similar networks, but you were successful, whereas others fail. And I think it had to do a lot with your leadership, about the focus on a shared goal, which I think is really important, which helps put egos aside. Because in volunteer work that we all do, right, we always see that there also tends to be within our coalitions and our groups conflict, personal issues, egos. And the fact that, you guys as a group were able to put that aside and focus on a common goal, I think is, not just remarkable. I think that attributed a lot to your success. Would you agree?
I do. Thank you. And I was very lucky as sort of a baby activist to step into this community of primarily women who were sort of ready, willing, and able to bring their own talents and perspectives, and again, listening to what other leaders, other members had to say, and help people grow into new roles. I think in our first several years as an organization, if I remember right, it was over 80 members who ran for office I think it was 2018, and it was making room for people to grow, and I was still a fledgling leader at the time, but I'm very grateful to the room that the leaders provided.
Thanks, Leslie. Again, kudos to. I think there's a lot of lessons for us to learn from that organization. Moving on to immigration, and as we all know, for Amy, immigration continues to dominate national headlines amongst the other million other things that we are constantly bombarded with. But I think immigration has its own sort of, from day one, this has been something that this administration is clearly targeting. So whether it's asylum restrictions at the southern border to increased ICE activity, policy shifts that seem to change on a daily basis, but hugely impact immigrant families, right? So my question is can you share a little bit about how these developments are affecting immigrant communities here in New Jersey? And what are some of the most urgent actions that your organization is focused on in response?
Sure. I think there's there's like a million places to start answering this question, but I think I'll start with like community impact. And then I'll talk a little bit about, just because this is an advocacy and organizing space, I'll talk a little bit about like political impact and opportunity. I think, when the election first happened, we were fielding like a lot of requests from press and lawmakers saying like, what are immigrants feeling in this moment? And it just felt like how people are feeling. Like this is the worst possible outcome. And we know what they've been saying on the campaign trail and, for years prior about what they intend to do. And I think like all of those things exist today, right? We're seeing people disenroll their kids from school. We're seeing people, not go to needed healthcare appointments or, not report instances where they're a victim of something. There's a lot of ways in which people are removing themselves from public view and removing themselves from the social safety net, which is really something very scary. But I think what's very different from the last administration or the last time Trump was in office is that this time there's this extra level of like even doing the right thing is dangerous. So we're hearing about people showing up at their check-ins with their immigration judge and they're being arrested on the spot, or they're having their case dismissed and then they're arrested and detained. So we have people facing a really impossible choice: either do the right thing, the thing that you're told to do, right? The legal thing, which again, there's like really no pathway towards legalization right now. It's incredibly impossible to get any sort of secure status. But do the right thing or do what your gut is telling you, which is that, showing up to these places could mean risk of arrest. And I think we're in a place now where we've so fundamentally eroded basic institutions that you can't trust the letter of the law because those executing it are going to bend it in whatever way they can to harm whoever the target community is. And I think immigrants have sadly become the most least sympathetic, like socially, politically. And maybe things are like starting to turn when we talk about, spaces outside of this, right? Like larger public opinion. I think maybe it's starting to turn, but still it's not an incredibly sympathetic issue. And people don't really understand the immigration system. They think it's like it was when their grandparents came or their great grandparents came, or even when they themselves came, right? The immigration system is so different today than it was even just a few years ago. So that then leads me to the next piece, which is like the political opportunities and impact. I've been very proud of New Jersey I've been very proud of facets of New Jersey in the last few months. New Jersey was the first place to experience a mass workplace raid, even before New York City, in the Ironbound in Newark. And we saw every leader in the state stand up and loudly say, ICE isn't welcome here, and what they did was wrong. We also were the site of the first detention center under the new Trump administration, and we've seen how both Newark City Hall and our congressional leaders have really taken ICE to task to hold them accountable for breaking local law. And of course, Delaney Hall has remained in the news because of the abhorrent conditions there and what people are saying about the inside. But equally as present in the news is how New Jerseyans are resisting, how our Congresswoman LaMonica McIver is standing up for herself and saying, no, I'm not guilty of these charges. And she has her arraignment on Wednesday. I invite anyone who's interested in coming with us. We're going to be rallying outside the federal court Wednesday at 9:30 a.m. before she has to go in for her arraignment. But it's been really amazing to see various leaders step up and take charge of this conversation and say, whatever you're saying down in Washington, we reject that because here in New Jersey, we know it's true. But I think one disappointment has been, for as much as we see a lot of local or even federal leaders stepping up, our legislature is like not really doing anything. We have publicly funded immigrant legal services that are sort of likely to get baselined with no increase, despite a huge increase in private detention in New Jersey. There's also a bill, the Immigrant Trust Act, that has been languishing in the legislature since before the election. And actually, prior versions of that bill have been introduced every year since 2021. So even stretching back to the Biden administration. But lawmakers are saying now, oh, we can't pass laws that are going to get challenged in court. Well, this administration is challenging everyone in court. That's not an excuse to stand down. They're not going to, again, they're not obeying the spirit of the law. They're going to use whatever workarounds they can to attack people. We've seen them do that against the mayor of Newark. We've seen them do it against our congresswoman. They're doing it against 4 sanctuary cities in New Jersey. Them coming after us is not an excuse, I think, to be silent. And if there is a fear of, federal attack or whatever it is, I mean, the Biden administration sued New Jersey over our detention ban. And even if you believed that the Biden administration would be friendlier to these things, that doesn't explain why we didn't pass this bill in previous cycles, right? When it could have been politically easier. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for advocates and communities to push their state lawmakers. It's a really big election year for Trenton. I think there's ways to get involved. If you're feeling that, you're not having the representation that you want, or you're not hearing the voice that you want, pushing back against what's coming from Washington, now is the time to get involved in state politics and understand what the various dynamics are and how you can get involved. I think as someone who hadn't spent, I haven't spent my whole career in New Jersey, and, had been doing very similar work in places like Albany under the Cuomo administration, like very, very different political dynamics. I've always been surprised how much a little pressure works in New Jersey. Sometimes just having like a new community voice, someone who's activated for the first time, talk to their lawmaker, can make a huge difference, because Trenton really is an insider's world, and they hear from the same people over and over and over again, which also means they get to ignore the same people over and over again. But, a little bit of pressure goes a long way in New Jersey, and there's no better time to get involved than now.
You made so many good points, Amy. I'm going to try to hit on a few of them. So I think, when you talked about the fact that there is fear, right? There is real fear in the immigrant community. And I'm sure Parul can agree with me that, speaking from, the South Asian perspective, when I see in our community, most of us obviously are immigrants. But there is also this divide between what they consider legal immigration and illegal immigration. And it's really interesting to me that, I had a conversation from a very unexpected source. I thought one of the best arguments on that. I was actually talking to former Senate President Sweeney, and we were talking about this issue. And I was pointing out to him this sort of discrimination that exists in the South Asian community, where they don't feel there's this attitude that, I followed the process, right? Like, why should these people get in for free? And he said to me, well, there was a process for you to follow. For unskilled workers, there is no process. And that's a failure of our immigration laws and our immigration system. So to, make people aware of things like that and understand that these people are a integral part of our country and our economy, and honestly, this country could not function without them. I think, we need to definitely start demystifying and also, humanizing the issue, and, talking about, some real challenges instead. And also, what you talked about in terms of legislation, I think we have seen, passing legislation always has challenges. And, I think also more and more with what's going on at the federal level, we have seen states become really the first line of defense, right? So Again, I also always encourage people, it feels overwhelming and sometimes helpless at the federal level, but there's a lot we can do at the state level. So get involved, lobby at the state level, and we can really bring change. And I agree with you. I think, especially the last 8 years, since Governor Murphy got elected, I have found a lot to be proud of in New Jersey. So whether it's things that we've done to protect immigrants, it's things we've done to protect reproductive health. We're not perfect, but at least we've taken some real strong measures. Increasing the minimum wage. We talked about earlier. I don't know. I'm sure you're one of the big victories was also driver's licenses for all, things like that. Like we have taken some really concrete progressive measures, and obviously the work will continue. I do also want to highlight, especially since Lauren is not here, that when you talked about the fear, I think the other community that is really under attack and feeling a lot of this fear is the trans community. And they have been the target, similarly to the immigrant community from day one of this administration. And again, that's another community that does not get a lot of love or a lot of understanding at all. I think general public opinion about the trans community is really, I recently, I think it was yesterday, I read how support had really decreased in the last decade. And I think what really shocked me is I was texting with Lauren yesterday, and she said in New Jersey, based on the Supreme Court decision, doctors were canceling healthcare appointments out of fear. And I think we've seen that in other states with reproductive health. And to see that happen now in New Jersey, even though there is no law in New Jersey banning gender affirming care, is really scary. So I think it's upon all of us to stay vigilant, to use our voices really to advocate for communities that honestly often feel like they don't have a voice. So thanks, Amy. For Parul, similar to the immigrant thing, there's also been a lot of talk lately from the current administration about dismantling or defunding the U.S. Department of Education. For families of children with special needs, this raises serious concerns. Can you help us understand a little bit about what's really at stake? What would losing federal oversight mean for the rights and services of kids that rely on these services and currently receive them?
So yes, thank you for this question, Anjali. As is with every other space, this is always ever evolving. Every day there's a new thing out there that we are combating. But right now, some of the propositions from the federal government in terms of their bill has been reducing oversight of states, basically saying, oh, let's give states back the education that they provide. Now, what that does is this can create a very, very haphazard method of administering education. States, they have really nobody with oversight over them. Children with disabilities, if they are discriminated against, the absence of the OCR department and removing disability from there actually reduces the protections for this group significantly. They were actually recently, they were not even hearing any cases of civil rights for children, people with disabilities. The biggest, we'll be probably scaling back 50 years when children were actually sent out somewhere and put away in a rural space and never seen. There were lots of fights. IDEA came about, least restrictive environment was introduced. All of those protections have the possibility of going away without federal oversight. The funding, Title I, Title II, IDEA funds, cutting all of them, and for school districts that depend solely on a lot on federal funds and state funds can actually be dramatic, because this is actually the most vulnerable population. This is at the intersection of those with disabilities and those who do not have the resources to supplement. They are going to start scaling back services then. And, there is no oversight. There is nobody watching over the state. So, for example, there was a time when New Jersey was not meeting the due process timelines. And the federal government actually put in a state monitor, and it has been rectified ever since. But without all of that, families really have nowhere to turn. Like, there is nowhere to go. There is no way to make sure that states actually do what they're supposed to do. The other role that federal government has done has been a lot around guidance, right? To basically make sure that the way special education is being administered is sort of homogeneously spread across the states. How do you do proper due process? How do you have access to the right behavioral supports? All of this has been coming from the federal government. A lot of it has been coming from the federal government, so that there is sort of like a even keel hand, and everybody understands what the process is and what the expectation of IDEA as the law is. So without all of this, and my biggest fear comes from school choice, which right now, if you have a different school that you choose, they're not required to honor IDEA, which means what's going to happen? What's going to happen is more and more children with disabilities will be found in public schools. Public schools are going to be under a burden because now all of these schools are, due to choice program, are moving out of the schools and going to other schools that they can. And we are going to end up in a very, very segregated setting. These are all really, they're highly technical, but also not, in the sense that it really will be setting us back so many years from the time that IDEA was put in place. Recently, there was legislation saying ADA, you're not required to have federal funded building be accessible anymore. I mean, I'm just like, okay, where are we headed with this? I don't know. So really, I think at this point, it threatens this population in the most serious ways. The Medicaid funding cuts that come down, all of our adult population over 21 significantly depends on Medicaid funds. And in the absence of that, you may have heard the people who need 24/7 care, we'll have to put them back in institutions. So we're really going back. We're going back 50, 70, 100 years. And this is not going to be, it's not going to be, just like the immigrant population, just like LGBTQ. It's basically a way to sort of wipe them off from the face of, just pretend like this population doesn't exist and we don't have to service them. And that's not how our society evolved over time. We evolved to take care of those in vulnerable situations. Right now, we're saying, no, we don't want to do that.
So I don't know where this quote is from. It just comes to mind that, the measure of a society is how we treat our most vulnerable. And I think the fact that we see the communities, like as you mentioned, without a doubt, our members with disabilities, I would say qualify for that, moniker for sure. One of the questions that I had is a lot about funding, right? So my understanding anyways is that almost all of the special education in New Jersey, whether it's in public schools or in specialized institutions, is funded through federal dollars, right? So do you see what looks like is going to happen with that? Like, are we going to lose all that funding? Is the state going to be able to step in? Where do you see that going?
So it's not all. It's IDEA had promised back then to fund at least 40%. we currently stand at about something between 13 to 15%. But as is with any budget, right? Imagine 13 to 15% cut here, and then more money in federal funding, which basically the Medicaid funds, about $14 billion that we'll lose. We have in Medicaid dollars about 10 billion if we lose. Like, it's pockets, different pockets, and you basically end up hitting every group at every age. So yes, it's 13 to 15%, but if talking as a percent, it may seem small, but it is going to be a big gap. Like, if there's no accountability, frankly, what is to say that, the only protection and the only way to actually protect this is to codify some of the things that actually the federal government was supposed to provide, codifying better, more stringent due process requirements, codify in your state legislation, codifying more access, and making sure that there is chances of less discrimination, making sure that civil rights are protected, codifying all of that in the state constitution, educational as a fundamental right. Those are the things that we are going to have to sort of start pivoting to, because it's really, nothing is moving at the state, at the federal level. Nobody's affected, nobody's listening, nobody's answering at this point. And we had the opportunity with 3 congressmen here in our state to refuse the Medicaid funding bill from going through. And I cannot tell you how many times we as a community reached out and nothing changed. Like, nobody's listening. So our only other alternative is to now go back to states and say, hey, can we codify this and protect these children and protect these adults? And so that's where we are.
So, I mean, that's actually a great segue into my next question, which is basically that, and this is for all, but I'm going to start with Parul since we're just continuing it. So are there actually, legislative or policy strategies, in your case at the state level, but for the others, even at the federal level, that you are actually prioritizing? What are the kinds of policy changes that, you're looking at specifically to advance equity and protections?
So one of them is, definitely that one of the legislations we worked on was actually the family's participation in the IEP process. IEP is an individualized education plan that a school develops whenever you're identified as a student who needs services. And I think right now the parents' access to it is restricted by some of the things, like the draft is not shared with parents ahead of time. They sort of come in, and a lot of states have actually codified that this draft should be shared now 5 days before. If a draft exists, it is required to be shared. That's what IDEA says. And this can help parents prepare better for the meeting. This can help administrators and teachers efficiently use their time in classrooms instead of actually meeting again and again and having a very, very conflicted IEP process, which is where the services and the education plan for students are decided. So I think more parent participation and making sure that parent participation is actually useful and can be conducive in state legislation. That is one very important aspect. The other one is after 21, group home abuse and neglect. I don't know if you've seen all of the articles that have come out, but this has been going on for the last 20 years. The lack of transparency, the lack of accountability, the lack of data, the lack of a registry for offenders. Somebody can cause abuse and neglect in one group home and then move over. The difficult uphill fight for having cameras in group homes. Some of these things now, like we have camera in supermarkets at this time, right? But group homes are not required. Nursing oversight in group homes. Prisoners actually get nursing oversight when they have to take medication, but in group homes, it's not required to have nursing oversight when medications are administered. Like imagine doing that in a school, like it would be a no-go. So I think there are lots of spaces right now that we need to target to protect this very vulnerable group. I think much of it has to come from, unfortunately, we're going to have to focus on state level efforts right now, because I don't think that the federal government is going to budge on this at all. And anywhere that they feel like they have to spend even a dime more on a population that they don't care about is not going to happen right now. So, codifying some of these things, working with your legislators and actually educating them. My understanding is also that the more I've spoken to legislators, the less they know about all of these things happening. Like the questions that you get when you even go for a testimony are like, what do you mean that they don't have this in place? Like if a group home has an issue, they don't call 911. If somebody is having a seizure, dying, you don't call 911. You don't try to revive them while 911 is on its way. Like they won't touch the person. Like these are things, these are very basic, very, very basic fundamental things which are not happening. So we need to put that awareness out there. It's a vulnerable group, and I think anybody, if anything from here, if you are part of the disability population, now is the time to come up and speak. I know how overwhelming this is as a parent. You're just constantly, day by day, just getting through yourself. But this is the time when it's very important to also talk to your local assembly members and educate them on the issues that you struggle with. So I think that would be my message, that catch hold of your assembly members, educate them, try to talk to them about the issues that you face as a parent, even though it feels like overwhelming and day-to-day navigation is so hard. But, the supports that we need are, the only people that right now we can rely on is this perfect trifecta that we have in New Jersey.
Thank you, Parul. And I would say from AUW's perspective, it's definitely something that we would want to be involved in. So, if you keep us on the loop, we would definitely like to submit testimony, advocate on your behalf. I think this is definitely an issue that our members would be happy to, advocate for. So, yeah. I go to Leslie. Same question. Any policy issues or policy things that you would like to see enacted in New Jersey or at the federal level?
Sure. So NJ IIth for Change's top priority is likely to be the gubernatorial election work in the coming months, making sure we don't have a MAGA Republican running our state. That's the biggest thing that we and our members have the skill base to do to advance equity and protections for New Jerseyans. So electoral work more than leading on legislative policy. We've always been attentive to policy issues that face us. We've been strong supporters of good government policies, testifying during redistricting hearings about drawing fair borders. We were active during the Oprah Open Records hearings. We educated our members about the line. Obviously, good government in the next few years is going to mean all sorts of like horrible, exciting new things. But building a state government bulwark against federal government attacks, that's something that we want to be in the fight on. I'll say that we have utmost respect and admiration for dedicated advocacy groups like Garden State Equality, like the Alliance for Immigrant Justice, Planned Parenthood, so many sort of focused issue advocacy organizations that focus on specific at-risk communities. We try to be supportive of organizations that have expertise that we don't have. We know that they're the rightful leaders on policy issues that affect their unified community members. And what we can do is learn from other organizations, amplify their messages, and lend our numbers to pressure on lawmakers. So I think that our policy engagement will be a fluid thing, learning from our coalition of partner groups, while what we're able to lead our members on is electoral work.
Thank you, Leslie. And Amy, I know that you definitely have things that you're working on.
Yeah, so I'll drop in. I'm not sure if I have access to the full chat, but I'll try
Yeah.
and drop it in. An action page for the Immigrant Trust Act, which would provide crucial protections for New Jerseyans and affirm that they belong in New Jersey. And the way that the Immigrant Trust Act would do that is by forbidding any sort of questioning of immigration status unless it's needed to determine eligibility. So you shouldn't need to ask a parent when they're enrolling their kid in after school about their immigration status. If you're registering someone to vote, you definitely need to ask, and that's a valid place, right? But sometimes in a rush to, get through the intake process or speed things up, people will ask things like, do you have a driver's license? Show me your passport, right? And this can unknowingly trigger people to think like, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize I needed to disclose my immigration status for this service, right? Or I'm just going to avoid that office altogether because I know I'm going to have to show a lot of paperwork and I don't want to, I don't want to put myself as a target. We already have some of these protections in place, which is great, but they're insufficient and they're not permanent. And they don't expand to critical places like schools, libraries, health centers, all of the places where people need to not just live, but to thrive. So we encourage folks to take action for the Immigrant Trust Act. This is really the first step in making New Jersey a safer and more welcoming place. And we cannot consider anything else, especially when we have these major billion-dollar, billionaire private prison corporations banging down our doors. We really need to affirm as a state that immigrants belong.
Thank you. Thanks, Amy. I'm looking through the chat and the Q&A. I don't see any specific questions for our panelists. So I'm going to move on to our closing sort of question. And this is something, honestly, that is very sort of personal for me from my advocacy journey. I would say advocacy can be tough, emotionally and politically. But again, our panelists would, I'm sure, agree we keep showing up because we realize that so many people rely on leadership. So what keeps you going, for your personal self when the work feels heavy? And also, I always like to leave on a hopeful note. So, what gives you hope right now? We'll start with Parul.
Find your village. Definitely. And, it is leaders like Amy and Leslie and all of these other coalition groups also that when you see them, when you meet them, when you are in their spaces, and, like you, Anjali, just said to me, oh, AAUW would be willing to support and lend voice to this. My biggest go-to has been other leaders who are in this space when I am tired, when I'm exhausted, when I am all very disheartened, but also at every time remembering, it's a very, very key thing. We have a democracy and we have a process of doing things. In the absence of that process is what we're seeing is happening right now. We want to have this process. We want to have all of the ability to actually advocate and make sure that the changes are happening in the right way. Because in the absence of it, we've seen what happens. And that is the one key that you have to always remind yourself, that change is slow for a reason. And we have to stay at it. And again, coming back to Leslie's point, listening is key. There is another point of view or perspective that we need to take into account. And it impacts everybody. So I think these are the things that I constantly have to remind myself. There are people out there. There is a process in place for a reason. This is a democratic process. And we have to hear the other side to actually make our arguments stronger. And sometimes you'll find that the other side is trying to make an argument which actually weakens their argument. And you're like, oh, but that doesn't make sense, right? So these are the things that keep me going. And truly, I think one for me, one child impacted positively is one child better left than what I found it. So I'm going to keep pushing. I keep saying, I think people who parents of children with disabilities have tremendous amount of stamina. They're not going away. And I always say that to even all my legislators. Like, I'm like, if you think I'm going to go away, that's not going to happen. I'm going to keep running into you. I'm going to keep asking you and keep showing up. That's important.
Thank you, Parul. Amy?
I think mine is not so positive, but it's what works for me. My friends and I joke that we have something that we call mold personality. Mold personality is someone who like takes on really difficult work, and like the harder it gets, like the more invested you are in it. But mold also like last for millennia, and like mold is found on the International Space Station, and it like exists in really dire, dark, terrible places, and it's like the only thing that can survive. So whenever things are really tough, I just tell myself like be mold, be moldy, and hold on. Like the worse it gets, like the better, the sharper you become. So I don't know if that's necessarily a positive spin, but it's like the thing that I always think of whenever things are really bad. I'm just like, oh, this is definitely a mold situation.
Thanks, Amy. Leslie?
Sure. I'll say, hope is hard right now. I don't think I'm alone in feeling that way. What sustains me emotionally as a human being, other than, staying up till 4 a.m. making, cutesy political Canva graphics, it's the close friendships that I've built through activism, people I'd never have met had I not pivoted my life in 2017. The best friendships are forged in the trenches, and this is our war. It feels that way on a kind of daily basis, and I don't know how I'd have gotten through Trump 1.0 or COVID or Trump 2.0 without this community of leaders and volunteers, people that I now know have incredibly good and ferocious hearts, and that really is a sustaining thing. What gives me hope is the fact that there's this whole universe of leaders and volunteers just here in New Jersey who work with incredible good faith and skill and determination to protect people and to protect the environment and to protect our democracy. I remind myself when I'm feeling bleak that we've got these people in Jersey, and I know that similar cells, organizations of people exist in every state across our country doing the same kind of work with the same kind of passion and urgency. I've never met them, but they are an army of allies. And, NJ IIth for Change, our favorite catchphrase is the power of us. And that's what gives me hope, is there's us here that I can see, and then I know they're out there doing their part, and I have to do my part to support them too.
Well, for sure, I think we all believe in the power of us. Like, I mean, that's what really drives our advocacy work, right? And I think, again, as you all said, your village, right, keeps you going. I'll just share personally, for example, I had actually worked on the Hillary Clinton campaign in 2016. And when, the results of the election, I was devastated. I mean, and I realized that this time round it was different. And it was different because in 2016, I did not have community. I did not have people to share that grief, that disappointment, that loss with. This time round, because of the work that I have been involved in 8 years, I had people that I could share that with. And so it felt different. It felt a little bit lighter, even though we knew that this time the administration and what they did was going to be much, much worse, right? But it's still, because it didn't feel like you were carrying the burden alone. It felt different. So, I want to thank you all for this incredible conversation, for sharing your wisdom, your courage, and your heart with us today. Thank you for everyone in the audience for showing up. Your presence here confirms that we are all part of the same movement. We can continue to lift each other's voices, show up for our communities, and take action that leads to lasting change. As a reminder, we are recording this, and this will be up on our YouTube channel that we will then send out to our members to watch. So thank you again for joining us today. Thanks.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.